There is an expression that's actually called an aphorism, for those who like the fancy word, that perfection is the enemy of good. It's attributed to Voltaire. I'm not a historian of philosophy, so I have no way of verifying that. But the expression basically means that if you're trying to do something perfectly, you'll end up missing out because you won't do what is good. And sometimes good will help you go from good to better. And so if you're aiming for perfection, you'll not do anything. And many of the benefits of trying and doing something a little less than ideally get lost in the process. So that's the secular idea that perfection is the enemy of good. The Torah perspective on this expression is quite different. First of all, we draw from a Chazal. The Chazal say, Lo alecha hamelacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin lihibatel mimena. That's the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos that tells us that you don't have the job to complete any task. You are not in the business of completing a task. Your job is to do the task and not to complete it. And that is a very foundational perspective in Jewish thought, that we are not in the world to finish anything. Lo alecha hamelacha ligmor. We are not in the world to finish or complete anything. We are always we're called on to do, because doing brings us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's why we're not ben chorin libatel mimena. That's why we cannot free ourselves or exempt ourselves by the fact that we're not meant to finish the job. That doesn't in any way exempt us, because the job itself brings us closer to Hashem. So we have a bit of a paradox, where on the one hand, we're always meant to do a job, and on the other hand, we are never expected or meant to complete the job. We are always on a road towards. And that, in the modern mind, is a little bit hard to tolerate, because we naturally like to see something completed. We get a certain satisfaction out of seeing something completed. And yet the Torah tells us that while we may sometimes be blessed with seeing something that appears to be complete, our mission is not to complete the task. The mission is to engage in the task. And this idea of finishing tasks has a strong spillover into the world of personal growth. And that is that people think that they somehow are supposed to achieve a good midah or self-perfection, and it couldn't be further from the truth. And let's explain why. The simplest explanation for why is that improving a person's midos is trying to make us as similar as possible to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So before we even get past the starting block, that should send up a signal that says, Lo alecha hamelacha ligmor, that you will not complete that task. By the nature of the Ribono Shel Olam's perfection, you will not complete the task. But you, at the same time, are not free to desist from the task because we're here in order to get more proximate to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means coming closer to Him. And if the efforts that we're making are in emulating Him, we are in the process coming closer to Him. So the first step in the process has to be a recognition that perfection is not the enemy of the good. Perfection is meant to be impossible. And it is designed, it is by design, that this is the Olam Ha'asiyah. This is the world where we're supposed to be striving and struggling. There's another world called the Olam HaGemul. It's a world where there's a sense of satisfaction, reflecting on a job well done. But if you try to squeeze that into this world, you end up with a distortion. And the distortion sometimes gets very severe. And let me explain why that happens. There's a pasuk in Mishlei that tells us, Kol darkei ish zach be'einav. So the first half of the pasuk means that the ways of a person are zach, in his eyes. Zach, as in Shemen Zayit Zach, means pure or perfect. It doesn't even say Kol Darkei Ish Yashar Beinav, even though that's the way most people remember the pasuk as being Kol Darkei Ish Yashar Beinav, that they're straight in their eyes. The pasuk says Kol Darkei Ish Zach Beinav. V'sochein Ruchos Hashem. The pasuk ends with telling us that it is a Kadosh Baruch Hu who knows what the real story is. So the Medrash explains this pasuk as being that since a person thinks of himself as shalem, as zach, as perfect, he stops striving. Because I'm there. I recall a student once telling me that he is a tzaddik gamur. I was very touched by his telling me that he's a tzaddik gamur. In fact, I asked him for his autograph because I told him that I had never met a tzaddik gamur before. And so this 19-year-old was a tzaddik gamur, so I asked him for his autograph, being that it was so rare and so unique, and he was happy to accommodate me. So the idea that somebody has there's a wired-in flaw, and that is, since we know that personal growth is difficult, it's challenging, it doesn't happen in one go. It's an ongoing process, a lifetime process. It is the shortcut to say, well, I'm the guy. I am the way a person is supposed to be, fully and entirely. And that gives the person this obviously false, perhaps foolish sense of satisfaction, a smugness that says that they have achieved because that's the way I am. And the way I am must be perfect. Somebody must have told me that I was perfect. And so the way I am must be perfect. And so there is no growth available because the darkei ish is zach beinav. And that is a occupational hazard of being a human being. An occupational hazard of being such a lofty being, of being a Yitzir Kapav of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, of being Hashem's handiwork, of having a neshama, of being so exalted, of being so majestic as a human being is. An occupational hazard of that is to assume that the person has reached the end of the food chain and that they are now zach. And the pull to get to this place of I am zach, I am perfect, is one that makes it's surprising how often when you have a conversation about personal growth, there's almost immediately a tendency to defensiveness. And the Balei Musar spent a lot of time making sure that their students broke through that wall of defensiveness when talking about personal growth. Because personal growth does not imply that I am flawed. It implies that I'm on a road, and a road that stretches out in front of me to infinity, to perfection that only rests and resides in HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. So the Balei Musar used to do this process with their students over and again, so that when a conversation came up and the discussion was about how to improve and how to grow and how to evolve and how to mature and how to come closer to emulating Hashem, it wasn't met with resistance. Because when it's met with resistance, that's the pasuk. Kol darchei ish zach be'inav. Everything that a person does feels it must be right, because that's the way I do it, and that's the way I respond. And so when we look back at the expression and we say perfection is the enemy of good, we don't take that as just meaning that if you aim for perfection, you're going to fail on the good. It means that perfection is part of a bug, if you will, a bug. Maybe you could call it a feature of a human being, that he strives for perfection, and so he always has a vision of perfection. But it's a bug when it becomes kol darkei ish zach be'einav, when a person starts viewing his own perspective and his own reactions as having achieved the end of the food chain. So now when we look back at that Chazal, and it says, Lo alecha hamelacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin libatel mimena, we mean a reminder that we're here to do the work. We're not here to complete the task. And v'sochein ruchos Hashem is that whatever accomplishment, achievement, perfection, if you will, that we achieve is all because our efforts were being blessed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu blesses our efforts and grants us a measure of success that moves us in the direction of ultimate perfection.